program today is History of Banking in Cullman. And we have several guests, and everybody that knows Irv Riley, y'all give Irv a hard time for not coming today. Francis scared him off by telling him that he had to talk. So Irv was also supposed to join us today. But Betty, Leeth, Haynes, and Ernie, we appreciate y'all being here very much. John Riley, his son Jay, appreciate y'all all being here as our guest. And John was asking me kind of how we needed to structure this today. And my thoughts are this. John and I have had several conversations where he was kind of teaching me some about the history of banking, because I get all mixed up about savings and loans and credit unions and banks and where they came from, state charters and national charters. So I said, John, why don't you just come and talk to us a little bit at the Historic Society about that. And then let's just think about the history of banking in Cullman. So several of our society members I know have done a little research. Virgil's done a little research. So the way I would like for us to do this today, if it's good, would be, John, if you would just come and share just a little general history of banking like you were teaching me. And then talk a little bit about Cullman Savings Bank. We're going to let Betty talk about Leeth Bank some. And we have a rule that we got to be done in an hour, so we may just have to stop when we get ready to stop. But John is the president of Cullman Savings Bank, and he's a Yankee. He's from New York, but he has done well in Cullman. And he's a good friend of mine, and I'm proud of what he's done at the bank. And John, with that, I'm going to let you come on and let Greg maybe put a microphone on him, Greg.
No, I'm just going to leave it up here.
Okay, fine.
It keeps. I think it'll pick up.
Are you all right where we are?
I think Francis wants to move the screen over there.
Everybody asking about moving it over this way a little, but make sure everything's
Yeah,
Anybody say? If not, we got some seats over here.
For me to start? I knew I had spoken a little bit too much when Bill told me after we had that discussion. He said, "We need to come talk to the Historic Society." And I thought, well, I'm not a public speaker. It makes me a nervous wreck, and you'll be able to see that here in a few minutes. My face will get all blotchy and everything. And then to come here and talk about the history of banking to people that could probably teach me 10 times more than I will ever know, that made me a little more nervous. So bear with me. I'm going to try to talk a little bit about this stuff. If my knees get weak, I may have to sit down. What Bill and I were talking about was kind of, and I love history, all kinds of history. I love doing genealogy, and what I try to do is I try to take myself, when you learn something, and put yourself in that time. What was going on in that time, whether the streets were paved, what the buildings looked like, how people paid for things, and kind of just immerse yourself into that time period. So going back to the beginning of Cullman Building and Loan, which was in 1887, like we said, it's our 125th year anniversary. The need for a building and loan at that time, banks, and Betty's going to get up here and talk about Leeth Bank. The banks at that time were more of a commercial bank. They were extremely needed for commerce. Somebody may have come down from Florence to purchase some mules at the mule barn here in Cullman, and chances are he could have had a note from a bank, a promissory note. And surely he wouldn't come down with $200 in coins. He might get knocked on the head or something. So he brought this bank note. He went to the mule barn and said, "I want to buy these 200 mules." That gentleman would probably said, "I'm not taking that. We're going to go over to the bank and see what that thing's worth." So they'd go over to the bank, and the banker would come out and look at what this gentleman had, and he probably had some relationship with this bank in Florence, and he knew about what that was worth. He may have discounted that. He may have said, "Well, if you're buying it for $150, I'll give you, $150 for the mules. I'll give you $40, and I'm keeping $10 of that money." So they were extremely needed at that time for basically commerce. People leaving their money in a safe place, and the loaning part of it, they loaned on for businesses. They're mainly commercial banks, is basically what we know of them as today. The gap was in long-term financing. And I'll show you a couple slides here in a minute about some things, when I went through these documents, it's amazing when you think about how things have changed. But to get a house loan, it just didn't happen. You know, if you were out there farming watermelons, you took your stuff in and you sold your watermelons at market, you took whatever money you made and you probably bought some supplies and went back out to your house and left some money at the bank for safekeeping. But as far as making a mortgage loan payment, there were a lot of individuals, and you probably know a lot of individuals in town that loaned money as a business. But mortgage loans weren't really around. So some of the founders of Cullman, John Cullman being one of them, and we have some of our documents with his signature on it, they came up with this idea of starting a building and loan. The building and loan was actually, a lot of it started in Germany, and it was a long-term financing vehicle to where they used the terminology of the little man. We're going to help the little man in the uplifting of our community. And we went ahead and altered our screen. So anyway, that's Cullman Building and Loan started to finance houses for people in Cullman. People got together. It was like they met at the old German Hall on Saturday night. And if anybody wants to jump in here and correct me, you're welcome to. But this is the stories I heard. They met at the old German Hall, the second floor of the German Hall. They'd bring their money in, and everybody pooled their money. And once they got enough money, it was December. They were founded in October. In December, they made the first loan. And we have a slide of that too here in a minute. They made the first loan, so they pooled their money and then loaned it out to people, and they would pay us back 5 to 6 to 7 years. And that was the first amortizing loans they had. Some of the founders, and we'll get to some of these pictures. I'll move through here pretty quick because I don't want to take up too much time. Jay, could you pull up that? This is Geo Dinkelberg. He was the first president of the bank and the founder of the bank. Sorry for the reflection of me in there. That's a hard picture to take a picture of because that is the original frame from 1904, and the glass in it's the wavy glass. So that's Geo Dinkelberg, our founder. He was actually, and again, jump in here if I'm wrong. From what I hear, he was a tavern owner, businessman, and he was also he was killed in the first courthouse fire. When the powder keg blew, he was one of the firemen that were killed. I believe there were 2 or 3 of them killed, and he was killed. And if anybody knows German, down here it'll explain, at the bottom it'll show, I think it was in 1904 that he died. Jay, go to the next document if you would. I'll just show you a few things here.
John, is that the Dinkelberg that's on the mural, the store?
His wife is the one that had the
His
Christmas
wife had
store
more like a millinery.
after he passed away.
And Melda told me one time, if I may interject,
Oh, yeah.
about Miss Dinkelberg, that she always dressed up to work, and she always had Christmas items in the store year round. And I thought that was fascinating.
It was
Oh,
called the Santa Claus store, and
Was
a
it?
lot of
Okay.
it was referred to in a lot of, some of the old papers, and she usually had that little dog in every picture.
That's right, yeah. But Melda told me that one time.
Our store was right up here where the parking lot is. Yeah.
And I don't think she ever remarried. I may be wrong.
That street up there is probably one of the most important streets in Cullman. People don't realize it.
And she had a beer garden. She had a
Next
store,
week.
she had a beer garden in the back until Prohibition came in like 1919.
Wasn't it down here on the corner?
And she had to close.
She may have had a beer garden after Prohibition too. The hedges grew a little higher.
Not her.
Jake, you go to the next slide. We have all the old books. We lost one book from 1890, I think 1892 to 1899 as it was missing. But we still have a lot of the old board meeting books. I'm gonna have to step over this way a little bit. But it talks about a lot of the things that were going on at the time. I'm trying to see what I pulled this one up for. Well, this is a little bit out of order. Jay, go to this one right here, number 4. This is an appraisal. I looked up, and if anybody's ever interested in any buildings in Cullman, whether you want a copy of the appraisal or whatever from 1899, I figured, well, it'd be pretty neat to do this one. The appraisal committee reported on the property of Charles Rule as follows. Lot number 462, 165 by 132, and I looked up. This, what we're on right now, is lot 462 of the city of Cullman, and it is still 165 by 132. As $412.50 for the lot, and the building that was on it's $250 for a total value of $662.50. I just thought that was pretty interesting. And many, many, many of the homes in Cullman have, we did appraisals on them. So you know, if anybody ever wants to look, I brought the books, we can flip through them. Remember, they're 100 years old, so we have to be careful with them, but I have several of the old ones here. Jay, go on to the next. This is the one we had there first, and this was pretty interesting to me. Charles Rule, attorney, was instructed to foreclose a mortgage on the property of Charles Rule for non-payment. And I still haven't figured that out. And I don't know who Charles Rule, the attorney, is, but...
Would that be real? It's
Real?
Yeah, real.
Real? Okay. But they,
This is the real building.
it was interesting to me to see, you know, again, it was foreclosed on. Go down to the next slide, Jay.
What date was that?
This was in
Charles
18,
Real?
go back, Jay, go back to that. You can go to the top, see if we have anything. I may have cut it off.
Anyway, I have right here, Charles Real operated the carriage and wagon manufacturing until his death in 1924. It was called the Charles Real Wagon and Carriage Manufacturing. I wonder if it was.
That's an unusual, I'm gonna look further down the road, because obviously they didn't take the property away. It was still, it was just an unusual entry that I saw. Go down to number 5, Jay. Is that the only ones you put in there? My son here has time out. Let's just say win one for the older people. How do I get out of that, Jay? I'm gonna close that. All of it. Now we're back to, I want you to just go back through these, okay? That's our special we're running right now. Y'all remember those rates? All right, Dave, go back through those. I'm probably running out of time, and I apologize. Stop right there. Go back one more. The other way. All right. Can you zoom in on this down here? This is a pretty neat letter written in 1914. Out a little bit more, Jay. Just put the clicker on this and roll your finger. Whoa, right there. Go up to the top. All right, this was April 20th, 1914. This is from Al Richter. I don't know if any of you have heard Al Richter, but his stuff in there was in the books. He was very active, very vocal, very forward-thinking person. And he was not going to be at this board meeting. And I thought this letter was pretty interesting as far as the times and how times change and thinking about where we are now. He goes through and he's talking about times change all things, the more thought and reflection on a shorter method, time-saving devices, and he's talked about this in 1914. All right, Jay, go to the bottom, and I'm going to show you the part that I found interesting. The idea of a 6- and 10-year loan term is most excellent and advantageous to the majority of borrowers. You know, we think of a 30-year mortgage, everybody gets 30-year mortgages. They were just considering stepping out there and going 10 years. You know, you think about what kind of a house would we live in if I had to pay for a house in 5 years or 6 years, I'd be borrowing about 1/10 of what I borrowed on my house. And we'd be living in a whole lot smaller house, which would limit commerce a little more. The Bittner family, where Mr. Bittner's here somewhere, they probably sell a whole lot less material. So a lot of those things that changed in those early years, it was kind of upbuilding what he called, go to the next page, Jay. He calls it the other way, Jay, the next one, right there. He talks in here about the upbuilding of our community and the upbuilding of Cullman, and that will create more commerce. We give these people this credit, we stretch it out for longer so they could afford to build a bigger house, which means they're gonna have to buy more lumber. Anyway, I brought that copy too. Go to the next picture. Again, loving history, I'm looking through these board meetings, and I'd go to like when World War I started, and I thought, surely I'd have to say something about World War I. You flip to that date, and they look in there, conducted business. I thought, man, Germans are all about just sticking to the business at hand. The only time they got out of the normal course of business is if somebody passed away. And I thought this one was interesting. Has anybody heard of G.A. Prince? Well, this is an entry in there, and I'm sorry for stepping in front of you. I'm not too good on some of these words. I think it's whereas on the 16th day of September 1902 at his residence in the city of Cullman, in the 51st year of his age, G.A. Prince did answer the awful summons of the death angel, fell asleep, and his proud spirit winged its flight to that mansion not made by man's hands. I have to figure that out there, but I thought that was pretty interesting. 51 years old. So there's a lot of that too. Every time someone died or left, they would have an entry. The other way.
What year was that?
That was back more. This right here. Again. All right, I'm sorry. Right there. That J. One more. Stop. 1902. September 1902.
What was it, 02?
Yeah, the 16th of September 1902. He died at his residence.
His best friend died in 95.
95.
So that would have been 7 years before that.
Oh, okay.
His best friend was John Coe.
Really?
And Prince was the mayor of Coe and didn't want to be mayor.
Jake, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. I want to finish this up, and I'm sorry for taking up so much time. Go back one more. Right there. I just thought this was interesting because Cullman Building and Loan wasn't a bank. It was a building and loan. So every day if people came in with their checks or their payments, at the end of the day, you had to put it in a sack and go over to the bank and make a deposit. We had, this was just a letter on Parker Bank and Trust Company. This is Mr. Robertson, I think it is. And he worked at Parker Bank, and he was also the secretary of Building and Loan. You all know Terrell Underwood. Terrell Underwood was on our board, longtime banker here in town. So it wasn't, like nowadays everybody thinks, well, Cullman Savings Bank, and the other banks in town were all the same. At that point in time, we'd have other bankers on our board of directors, which I thought was interesting too.
Wasn't one an association and the other a commercial bank?
Yes, exactly.
So there was no conflict because they were not the same.
Right, we were just a business that financed homes. We were not a bank.
What changed that, John? When did that change? What changed that?
Over time, a little bit has changed, but it wasn't that long ago. In the early 80s, when they deregulated banks, we're still fighting against that. Early 80s is when we were allowed to have checking accounts. We were a savings and loan. You had a savings account, and you could get a loan there. And that's about all we could do. And the government said you will earn 6% on a loan, and you will pay 3% on a savings account. So it was a whole lot easier then than it is now, where we're competing for deposits, and everybody's got different rates. It was very simple then. Deregulation in the 80s allowed us to have checking accounts, and it's, we still find that it's hard to build checking accounts because most people will come to us for a loan, but they've still got their checking account at Wells Fargo, and they won't move it. So that's when it changed a little bit over time.
Yeah.
80s is about. Go back again, Jay. This is the recording of our first loan. Peter Winkelbach, $200 loan. That was in December 3rd of 1887. Go back again, Jay. This is a bad picture of one of our early stock certificates, and I have the original there. Go back again. This is at one of our incorporating documents from back in 1887, and you'll see William Richard's signature. You see John Cullman's signature. And I can't see that one there, Jay, if you'll zoom in on that a little bit. I think you can just click right here, Jay. Just click right here. Now roll your finger. You know the little roller? There you go. A.G. Actually, I'm not sure who that is. I haven't seen that one before. October 1887. All right, go back one more. Go back again. This is a early stock certificate, but it's got where they tore off the certificates. Certificate number 2, and again we've got it's made to John Cullman, but we have another original John Cullman signature also. Back again. This is a copy of the first page of our charter. Jay, if you'll zoom in on that, you'll see that it looks like gibberish, but it is actually German. And that's our original charter. And we still have that. Back. I just took a couple pictures of some of the drawings we have in the bank. That's Mr. Charles York. He was president of the bank. Go back. It's Adam Dreher Furniture Factory. He was also president of the bank. William Heck. I believe he was the postmaster in Cullman for a time, and he was also the president. John Carter. Back again.
How did he spell his name, with a K or C?
It was K.
K.
In the books it is a K. And again, that's Dinkberg. Go back one more, Jay. I think that's it. We did bring some items. We've got the old ballot box. Some old, if you want to come up and look at them later, we've got some of the old where they tore off stock certificates. You're welcome to look at that. We got our old ballot box from 1887 and some other documents that you saw in here. I've also brought, and I asked for permission if I could bring them in here, I have the Derringer that was kept in the vault, and I'll get that out after we're done. And I have actually Leeth Bank's 38. I have that sitting over here. We'll get that. I'll let you look at that.
Like those story how you got that.
Does anybody have any questions before I yield the floor? I apologize for moving fast. I don't want to take too much time. Okay, yes.
How old do you think that Derringer is?
The Derringer is it's 18-something model, late 1800s. Now, when it was in the vault, Cullman Building and Loan, they met at the German Hall. Regular office hours started somewhere in the late 30s, early 40s, from what I was told by Mr. Clark, over by the Mary Carter Building. If you look at the corner of the Mary Carter Building, there's a doorway off down toward the Busy Bee. That was their first office. And then they moved to where Kent's Paint Store is. And I think somewhere in that period of time, probably in the 40s, they bought it. Any other questions?
Thank you, John. Continuing the discussion. Betty, come on up if you will, and tell us a little bit about Leeth Bank.
I was just thinking, I didn't have all that ingenuity of pictures and et cetera. I brought some. Matter of fact, I think Millie should be up here instead of me. She can tell you more about the Leeth Bank than I really can. But I did bring some pictures of some of the past presidents, and I thought you. Yeah, I thought that might be. I just thought we might try to pass this.
However you want to do it, Betty. We just pull them out and show them.
Let me show you. They're kind of.
That's my head your way.
I can move.
Well, I don't have that much to say about any of them, but some of this history, I went to the bank and found very little there. I went to the museum, I went to.
Maybe that's because John's already got your pistol.
And it wasn't there. Anyway, as I said, I went to the museum, I went to all the places, and I found a little, and I just sort of did it up in a little written form, and I thought as we touched on some of these, that's Mr. George Scott Leeth. He was the founder of the Leeth Bank. Excuse me. Am I not talking loud enough? Got on my hearing aids, that's why. This is Mr. George Scott Leeth. This is Cal, my late husband's father. He founded, well, actually two banks. He had a large mercantile store right on where the old Ponder block was, right there on the corner. And I do have a picture of that I thought would be interesting to be seen. It was on our bank wall for years. This is a mural. This is Mr. Leeth, and this is the first Leeth Mercantile, and the bank was in the back of that building there. But anyway, Cal told me this story, and said his papa started the bank in the store, in the back of the store, and that was 1906. And in 1909, he closed it, and he said, I don't know anything about banking, and he closed the bank. Then he built a new bank up on the corner where the bank is now, and that first bank was named the First National Bank of Cullman. And then the next bank that was built was the Leeth National Bank. And there's some pictures of this too, that this is the first bank that we actually built. And we put these down too. Up here I can see better. You all remember the one with the little turret right there? I'm old enough to remember it. But anyway, that was the first Leeth National Bank. And then they came on along in 1952. They tore this bank down and built this one, and it was considered a modern bank. There's some pictures of that here too. And this is an overall view of Cullman back then and here. And I love the mural that's Dot, that's on the wall of the Leeth Bank, and this is one of the pictures from one of your magazines. But I want to tell you, I particularly am appreciating the Historical Society of Cullman, because you guys are keeping us alive and moving and going, because it's history that's so important, and most people don't realize the value of it. They let the time just pass away, and then like me, I was looking for some things that I just really couldn't find. Let's see, I think
We decided you gotta get older before you appreciate the history. How we gonna get some of the younger people in it?
You're young. I'm going to just give you a little brief thing about the Leeth family in the bank, and I brought some other pictures, and these are the presidents after Mr. Leeth, and I'm going to read about them a little bit. Just start in order. I think that's Mr. Arnold. Okay. Anyway, I think I've already told you about the first bank and so forth. Then Mr. H.C. Arnold, who had been vice president for several years, was named president of the bank. He served from 1926 until his death in 1937. After him was Mr. J.P. Young.
I got it.
You wouldn't know, would you?
Yeah, he's got his name on it.
That helped, didn't it? Mr. J.P. Young was the third president, and he served from 1937 until 1944. After him was J.A. Dunlap. That was Oscar's father. He had been cashier for 25 years and was serving as vice president at the time of his death, and that was in 1947. Let me make sure, is that Mr. Dunlap? Yeah, maybe that's Mr. Dunlap. Then the next president was his son, W.O. Dunlap. We all knew him as Oscar, and he was elected on June the 7th, 1966. The other officers of that time are, well, these were past presidents. The only officers were Cal Leeth, first vice president, W.C. Martin, cashier, Miss Bertha Cooper, assistant cashier, Billy F. Parker, assistant cashier, and W.O. Dunlap, Jr., assistant cashier. The directors were Arthur H. Oppel, J.W. Arnold, Dr. G.W. Bledsoe, W.O. Dunlap, Cal Leeth, J. Robert Rawson, Dr. Frank Stitt, and Fina St. John III. I just showed you I'm trying to be able to make this brief, cause you said an hour, and they'll just start getting up and leaving, won't you, Garland?
We don't,
We got.
We
As
don't
long as
let
you're
them-
talking, I'm gonna be here.
Just copies on your phone.
Yeah.
Sorry, I like that.
I like this picture, it's got you in it, man.
Well, you know I had to bring that in, didn't you? Anyway, this is a picture made way back, 1997, when I was Miss Senior Alabama. So they wanted a picture to put on the wall, and this is all the directors at that time. Let me see if I can name them. Guy Cathy, this is Elliot Free, Bert McGreal, Don Davis, Danny McAfee, Boots Hill, Tom Hagan, Billy Jackson, Dr. Klein Adams, and Don Hubbard. But anyway, they didn't believe in saving things nearly. I just looked and looked, they took me upstairs to that vault, and I still couldn't find a lot. But anyway, I've kind of compiled what I could put together to share with you. In 1952, the building that I just showed you, that's next to the first Berry building, was torn down, and a new modern building was built at that time. And that building won the Architects Award for the year, for the entire state of architectural design. During the period of the construction of the bank, they moved everything over to the Fuller building. Millie, what was the year that you started working? Billy, you?
1950.
1950? 50?
76.
No, I'm sorry, 54.
76.
I didn't hear what you said, Billy.
54.
54. And Millie, what about you?
76.
What?
76.
Oh, 76, okay.
But those records were all there when I left the bank.
Oh, that's funny. But anyway, they moved everything while they were building the second bank, and I thought this was some of the media. Doesn't this sound typical? And its customers continued to be served in an efficient manner. The bank continued to grow, and in July of 1960, they purchased the West Side Furniture property from the Thompson family and removed the building for the purpose of construction, 2 drive-in windows, and to make off-street parking available to the customers. In July of 1966, the Boothman Building property was purchased, and the building removed to add additional off-street parking for its customers. Now, Bill, I remember all that. I'm up there too. But anyway, the Leeth National Bank is in its, this was written, this article that I'm following here was 1969, and some of these figures, of course, was for that era. The Leeth National Bank in its 60th year of serving the good people of Cullman and surrounding counties, it has total resources of $15,901,986.42. That was 69. In 1968, they constructed the North Side Branch Bank building in the Cullman Shopping Center, and it was opened on October the 14th, 1968, at which time they had the ribbon cutting ceremony, and the building was dedicated in honor of Dr. G.W. Bledsoe as chairman of the board, and an appropriate plaque for that. But I think of Dr. Bledsoe, I worked for him when I was just right out of college. And you talk about a father image, he taught me so much. One day he said, Miss Teddy, go to the lab and bring me blah, blah, blah. I don't know what it was at that time. Oh, I thought I was so efficient. I came right back at it. And he said, now, what do I need after this? And I looked at him, he said, I want you to anticipate my next move. So I learned when I went to that lab to get an instrument for Dr. Bledsoe, I thought 2 or 3 steps ahead. What was he going to need next? What was he going to need next? But he was a wonderful man, and he was good for the bank. They had the plaque in the north side branch of the Leeth Bank. I believe, let's see, the wording on that, I had that here somewhere, exactly what was said. Was dedicated in his honor as chairman of the board and was placed within the new building, which reads as follows: the North Side Branch, the Leeth National Bank, Cullman, Alabama. This building dedicated in honor of Dr. G.W. Bledsoe, chairman. That is kind of some history on what I could kind of put together in years and dates, and I'm going to quickly cover some things that I thought was especially interesting, and it's about the Leeth family. It said, Mr. and Ms. George Scott Leeth, the chronicles of Cullman's history would never be complete without an account of the Leeth family. George Scott Leeth came to Cullman as a young man here, and because of his astuteness as a businessman, his name has lived on and well remembered. In 1935, the American Historical Biography published by the American Historical Society had this to say about him. George Scott Leeth, businessman and civic leader, the evidence of progress in the financial status of the community are usually indicative of the type of man who conducts its affairs and institutions. Especially is this true of Cullman, one of the premier towns of northern Alabama. George Scott Leeth was often spoken of as the first citizen of Cullman, one of the greatest of its builders. Prior to his death, he had been a resident of Cullman for nearly a third of a century and had risen from a relatively unimportant merchant to be the proprietor of one of the largest mercantile establishments, the founder and president of a bank, and one of the most extensive property owners in the city. He was with one of the most vital, far-sighted, and progressive citizens, a man who wielded immense influence in civic, religious, and cultural affairs. He started out in Arkadelphia on the farming like most early settlers do, and then he started working on the side for a man in the Arkadelphia community that had a store. He was his assistant in the store. And then 3 years after that, he moved to Cullman and opened his own store. And that's the one with the pictures with the wagons and the horses and everything that I showed you. And the business continued to grow. And he was 64 years old when he died. And I remember Ms. Leeth saying that they had tried to get him to Birmingham. He was so ill, but he died on the way. And it was something internal. And anyway, I think, hey, Garland, is 64 young?
Yes.
I think it is too. That was a young time.
Oh, I'm 35 years old.
How old?
About 55, really. I said 35.
I'm going to just quickly cover some of this. George Scott Leeth was a native of the southwestern part of Cullman County in Arkadelphia, son of Winfield Scott and Levi Sanders Leeth, pioneer settlers of the section. The family is of Scotch-Irish, can't read that anyway, descent. Winfield Scott Leeth was a planter near Arkadelphia, a man prominent in politics and in religious activities, a leader in the community. He attended the local schools in another of Jasper, Alabama, and began working at an early age. Reared on a farm, he followed the usual course of the youth of that day and assisting his father until he became of age to do something. He was always interested in the people in the community. He had a real heart for people. And he had a knife that I wish I had one to brought you, but I couldn't find it. I'm like the bank, I couldn't find it. But anyway, it says everything for his store, everything for the living and dead except whiskey. He gave those knives out to everyone. Merchandising was the only and the first and perhaps the last important thing that Mr. Leeth of his enterprises. More than 3 decades ago, he founded the Leeth National Bank with a capitalization of $50,000, which supplied a marked financial need of the town. The bank became because of the character of its founder and president, made remarkable progress and later was incorporated with a double capitalization. But to the time of his death, Scott Leeth, to use the name by which he was affectionately known, remained at the head of the institution and directed its destinies. It became and is one of the strongest banks in northern Alabama. Even the financial panic of 1933 failed to weaken the resources of this bank. Mr. Leeth's foresight and sound belief in the future of his city and county led him to make extensive investments in properties, town and rural, and he became one of the largest taxpayers in the section. Numerous business blocks were among his possessions, such as those housing his department store and all the others that have been mentioned. He was treasurer of the Cullman Drug Company, a member of the board of directors of the Jefferson County Bank, Birmingham, and was financially interested in a number of commercial and agricultural enterprises. However, broad the scope of Mr. Leeth's business activities, and they demanded more of his energy than he wished, he did not neglect the higher ideals of human existence, being very generous of his time and means in the support of all measure tending to the public good. Education came in for a great deal of his attention and help. Not only were schools assisted in their establishment and work, but boys and girls were helped individually to secure schooling. His political affiliations were with the Democratic Party, and although he had served as alderman, the distinction which is supposed to come from political office never appealed to him. His influence often determined candidates and issues at election times, with party alignments playing unique roles. He was a member of the Alabama State and National Bankers Association, of course the Commonwealth Club, and many on here. It's about mostly all I have here that you. This is something about the family. On January the 6th, 1989, at Arkadelphia, Alabama, George Scott Leeth married Victoria Callahan, daughter of Thomas J. and Susan Reed Callahan. And I do remember Ms. Leeth telling me this through the years, that a man came to her one time in her husband's store and had said, if Scott Leeth can't make a living with a woman like you, there's not a limit to be made. She was very good at handling things at home and such. Let's see, daughter of Thomas J. and Susan Reed Callahan. They were the parents of 4 children. Stella Leeth, who married Harry Parker, and that's another interesting story. The president of the Leeth Bank married the president of the Parker Bank. They couldn't talk politics or banking together, could they? And they have a son, Harry Parker Jr., Alma Leeth, who married Lee Toggle, and they have 2 children, Mary Lee and Scott Leeth. Winfield Scott Leeth married Irma Kinney and of Cullman, and they are the parents of 3 children, Winfield Scott Jr., Joyce Elizabeth Leeth, and Barbara Ann Leeth. Mr. Leeth is now a vice president of he was 64 years of age at the time of his death on August the 20th, 1926. The sorrow of his fellow citizens was very great upon this sad occasion, for he was a man deeply loved and admired for his many fine traits of character. He had contributed extensively and constructively to many different phases of business, civic, and humanitarian activities. His memory remains green in the hearts of a legion of those who knew him. His achievements serve as a source of encouragement and inspiration to those who have taken up the work he was compelled to leave behind. And so that I'm going to end this story. So that's about what I have on the Leeth and its past, the Leeth Bank and the past presidents. And this is some personal things I thought you might enjoy. Thank you.
We've got one more little story I want us to get in today, the failure of the German bank. Virgil says he has found out what happened to the German bank, and I do not know. So I'm looking forward to what Virgil's found out for us.
Well, I just found out a little bit, but that's better than nothing, I guess. I always was told as a child around here, about that German bank. There's so many legends and rumors and untruths out there that are told as the history of Cullman, so I always look for what's correct. And I always heard that was Colonel John Cullman's bank. He didn't have anything to do with it. He died 8 years before it was chartered, so I don't think that would be true. It was chartered February 26th of '03, and it was just in business 11 years. So it was in business from '03 till November the 23rd of 1914. I think that in looking back to see about this, I did learn a little bit some more about the history of Cullman's banking. over in the vault of the probate office. You know, they got a lot of old dusty stuff. And there seemed to be several little private banks. Everybody want to start a bank back in those days, they just hang a sign. You know, this is a bank. Particularly commercial banks, and particularly in a community like Cullman was. It was a colony. And it didn't everybody just go with the law, or maybe the law wasn't as strict then as it is now. But I found that there was another bank that sounded a lot like this German Bank of Cullman, but it was not. It was the Bank of Cullman. And it was closed in 1900. And the man that had operated it, he and his wife sold all the assets and the notes and the cash and the deposits and everything. Is a long list of the inventory there in the bank vault and in the probate vault, and sold it to Mr. J.J. Carter, but he spelled it with a C, C-A-R-T-E-R. And it was on 3rd Avenue Southeast, so Mr. K-A-R-T-E-R owned a lot of land right up here on 3rd Avenue, you know. That was Arthur Carter's father. But they spelled it with a K, so it would have to be a different one. Hadn't found out what happened to it, if anything. I'm still looking to find out who the original incorporators and the original bank board was on this German bank, which is the one in the Mary Carter Building, we call it now. It was real interesting. When I was a child, that building was owned and rented, it was owned and used by a business called G.W. Johnson Estate, if y'all remember that. And the Mr. Johnson's son-in-law was named R.D.S. Robertson, and he operated it. George W. Johnson was a fishing buddy of John Cullman. And the best fishing was down here on the Mulberry Fork of the Black Warrior River at Garden City, you know, and that's where they had a Stephen Myers camp down there where they always did their fishing. But the stories was always told there in that store building. They had the original teller's cages in G.W. Johnson Estate. And Miss Pearl Robertson sold as quick as the war was over. My recollection doesn't start until about 42 and 43. Personal recollection. I was on the streets of Cullman, but being in that store, she'd still have those teller cages and would go in there, and people would have to pay her their monthly payments on their chainsaws and things. She didn't want to sell anything for cash. You know, if you came in there for cash, she almost wouldn't sell anything, because the main thing was the financing. In this, some of these lawsuits, there were a lot of lawsuits when this German bank closed. I'll get to that in just a minute. But in all those notes, they were at 6% interest.
How much, Virgil?
6%. 6%. But that was really unusual, because you're talking about, you know, before World War I. I thought that was interesting. We were talking about the appraisal, John Raleigh was a few minutes ago, of a building being $200, or a land here where the real building is being $150 or $200. Now that was a different kind of money. That's hard for us to imagine. But when we see that a bank is capitalized for $50,000, that makes more sense. Now this German Bank of Cullman was capitalized for $25,000 in 03. There was a real need, even though the colony of Cullman had established these building and loan associations. There was a real need for commercial banks, and individuals would just fill in and make commercial loans, like Ms. Robertson did. I think Alabama didn't have usury laws, or at least if they did, they didn't enforce them, because as a child here in Cullman, there was a lot of financing done by 4 or 5 individuals that I knew personally about, And the going rate of interest was 1% a week. That was just what it cost in Cullman for money. And everybody was just glad to pay it if you didn't have the cash. But today that'd be considered pretty high. On this German bank, they had been having problems for years. They had some of the officials of the bank were named Kramer, K-R-A-M-E-R. Some of y'all may remember George Kramer, that was City of Cullman city clerk for many, many years. I talked to Harold Mayo about it, and he said Mr. George told him that his uncle was the one that had absconded with the money from the German bank, caused them to close, and that his uncle had served time. I haven't been able to substantiate that. And the fact that there were two Kramers that worked there, Emil Kramer and Joseph Kramer, I'm not sure which one it was. The German bank of Cullman had a correspondent bank, and I think we supplied them with their money so that they could loan. And it was the Hanover Bank. The Hanover Bank of Germany had an American affiliate, and it was the Hanover Bank of New York. And so that's where they were getting their money from, the loan, and they had a lot of money loaned out to be a commercial bank. I think they were jumping the fence a little bit, getting over into the S&L ball game, because they had like 169,000. Just this week, I was able to get from the state of Alabama banking superintendent a lot of the old records from that German bank, which are pretty interesting. But anyway, they had 169,000 out on loan. It appears that the strongest, largest bank, at least one of at that time, in 1914, whenever this was declared insolvent, would have been the Parker Bank. In that store I was talking to you about, the G.W. Johnson Estate store that I was in, when they had the teller windows and all, and it was, the rumor about town was that when somebody said, well, who took over the German bank? Everybody said, well, the Parker Bank did. And officially that wasn't true. But unofficially, the banking superintendent turned it over to the bankruptcy judge, who appointed M.L. Robertson, cashier of the Parker Bank, to take over all the assets and pay the bills and distribute what funds there were and go through the bankruptcy proceedings. So even though officially it might not have been the Parker Bank took it over, unofficially it was just across the street and up the block, Mr. Robertson. They took all the books, you know, and took them a block away, and he saw after it. So maybe it wasn't all wrong when the general public thought that the Parker Bank had taken them over. Mr. Robertson was, in fact, the conservator of the bankruptcy of the German bank. It was interesting here that there were 4 or 5 lawsuits that I have the printouts from the state of Alabama Supreme Court about the German bank. And Sacred Heart Catholic Church lost $5,000. Now let's go back to that. Buildings and lots are worth $200 and $300. And banks are capitalized for $25,000. And their building committee on this first building that's up here now lost $5,000 in this bank failure. That's a pretty big loss. That's a different kind of money. You know, 1914, World War I didn't start till 1960. And lasted until late 17, early 18, I think it was November 17. And so, you know, $5,000 would be like $5 million today if you actually tried to convert that money. And they were being sued, and all these lawsuits were about after the fact, after that bank was closed by the state banking superintendent. Hanover would like to have gotten some of their money back, Hanover Bank of New York. And so they were coming in and sued. Borrowed money, just citizens of Cullman that had borrowed money, and they would come back and repay that money to German Bank and had receipts that they paid off that note 6 months later or 12 months later. And so they had their receipt, but the German bank didn't send that money back to Hanover. Somebody at the German bank kept it. And so some of these lawsuits were the Hanover bank trying to sue the citizen to make him pay again. But he had his receipt from the German bank, so it's very hard to make him pay again. So the question was, when Mr. Citizen paid his money, was the German bank in accepting that repayment? Were they accepting it in their own behalf or as an agent for Hanover Bank? And so I went to the Alabama Supreme Court as to whether or not they were an agent for. So in October, before the bank was closed in November of 14, the Hanover Bank sent an official letter to the German Bank of Cullman dissolving any possibility of them being an agent. So then Southern Cotton Oil Company got in on it. They sued. Everybody sued one another. And it took them until 1914 to 1918 to get it all sorted out and get through the court system and try to pay people back what little bit of money they had left. I don't know a whole lot more about it. It was...
So the story of somebody just taking the money and leaving for Germany is not true then?
Well, I don't think so.
From what you...
Yeah. Harold, yeah. You know, the two people that I always tell you that knows a lot more about history of Cullman than I do is Quentin Nigg and Harold Macon. And Quentin's is mostly in the county, and Harold's is right downtown, you know, because his papa ran the beauty shop. I'll guarantee you they do about everything right downtown. And that's what he told me. He said that George Kramer told him that his uncle served time for scammed him with the money. But I haven't determined that for a fact yet. One of the people that had borrowed money and repaid the money and then were being sued by Hanover Bank was Mr. Sutter. And Mr. Sutter, at one time, I think, was postmaster here. I'll read you just one little bit and I'll be through. This is about this Sacred Heart lawsuit, Sacred Heart Church, and their $5,000. There was the building committee for the church. Some more Harold Mayo information. I have his permission to quote him, so I'm not doing it without permission. Even though we're not guaranteeing the accuracy, we believe it to be correct. How about that for a disclaimer? The building committee was real interesting. I'll get to the right page in a minute. The building committee for Sacred Heart Church, I was going to read you the name of who's on the building committee. And you were talking about an attorney a while ago that was having to take legal action against either himself or somebody with a name pretty similar. This is the document from Banking Superintendent A.E. Walker when he closed it. Ron read these lawsuits. But this to me was real interesting if I can get to it. See, the German bank in November the 14th sent a cashier's check to try to pay off one of these other banks for money they had borrowed and were using. And the check bounced. And that's when the superintendent thought that might be a little weak. You go bouncing your cashier check. Sounds a little weak. Let's see. Now this $5,000 that the German bank lost, the people on the building committee that had endorsed the note that didn't get their money back J.H. Carter, and that's with the K, so that would have been Mr. Arthur Carter's father. Y'all may have known him as Jabba if you did. John F. Byer, Emil Kramer, William Richard. Now that's the one you've heard me talk about. It was John Cullman's partner. It was his Catholic step-grandnephew from France that he brought over here to do all his paperwork for him. You know, John Cullman made the paperwork. Max Schmidt, J.H. Voss, H.G. Mages. You know, the Mages family and the Gruffenstadts were all cousins. If you don't know where Gruffenstadt is, the street is over there. F.H. Holscher, Joe Byer, and there's Emil Kramer again. It was really interesting this week. A member of the Voss family stopped by our office, and we were just talking briefly. I happened to be out, but I was talking to him about us investigating, trying to find out a little bit more about this German bank of Cullman. And Mr. Voss mentioned that his grandmother, I think it was, had gone to work for...
Grandmother and grandfather.
Pardon me?
Grandmother and grandfather.
And grandfather had gone to work for the Tennessee Valley Bank. And you want to tell that story? Some robbers came?
Yeah.
And she wouldn't give them the money because she hadn't posted the day's receipts yet. And
So
because
they
she
shot her.
posted the receipts, she wouldn't let the robber have the money. He shot her.
Killed? No.
It was interesting. You know where the Tennessee Valley Bank is up there now for the Council Law Practice Office is, and it was over the door, Tennessee Valley Bank. That became the State National Bank. You know, that's where Mr. Harold Underwood ran his bank for so many years, until the whole State National change was bought out by Harry Brock, that did young upstart out of Birmingham with Central Bank.
Who was on the board of the German bank? When
That's
the
what I
German
hadn't
bank
found
started,
yet.
huh?
That's what I hadn't found.
Oh, yeah, what's that?
Nobody wants to admit on being on the board. I'm sorry, I don't have more. That was just kind of a short. Just looked a little while to see what I could find, and it is hard to find. But it was interesting that there seemed to be a preponderance of commercial banks because there was a shortage of commercial banks. Like you were telling, Don Conrad was telling, I think, maybe about the savings and loans were a German institution that had been established early on. Building and loans, I guess they call it. And that one that you were talking about just around the corner from Mayor Carter, I'd been in it several times as a child. And I believe Mr. Randy Clark was in there on Thursdays from 9 to 12. I think that was there. I think that was there week, something to that effect. Richard?
I can add a little bit on that. The bank, Cullman Building was meeting in the upstairs. If you look in this book here on the west side of the German bank, there was 2 doors. And they decided that Cullman Building and Loan needed an office. There was a 1-room office in the south door. The upstairs, the other door went upstairs. There was apartments upstairs in that building. And Mr. Johnson then took over from the German bank, and where the German bank in that corner became the South Central Bell. That's where the Bell telephone was. My Aunt Claire Bitter was there for forever, and when you had the telephone, we'd call, we'd say, Claire, give me Amos. So that means, Claire, give me somebody else. You didn't have numbers, so.
Bill's wife worked there too.
And then they moved from there to up on the corner where Briscoe Body Shoe Shop is now. That was a Brothers store, which was a grocery store. And it was Jim Edwards' daddy was the manager of that. And the Cullman Saving Loan moved up there into that building. And that's where they grew. And the first lady they hired was Elder Swan, who later on married Bill Keller. And Elder was the niece of Renee Clark. was working down the road at Tennessee Valley. Well, they got bigger and bigger, and that's when they hired Mr. Clark to come up. They were still in that building there at where Briscoe Body Shop, Briscoe Shoe Shop is now. So after that, that's when they built the new building down on the corner, then added to it later on. This is after they tore the courthouse down. They bought that property. Now, Betty, I'm telling how old we are here, so Betty Haynes and I are the same age.
You didn't say the rest of it. We went to different schools together.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bittner.
Can I ask Mr. Bittner a question?
So anyway, it appears that the banks were hiring different people from other banks, you know, the people with job shop, I guess they still do that some now. If they're trained in insurance or if they're trained in banking, then they go around town for a better job. Some of the people from these German bank went to work over at the Tennessee Valley Bank, and from what Mr. Bittner said, they also, some of them went to work maybe at Cullman Building and Loan about that same time.
John wants to ask Richard a question.
I wanted to just going through and researching the records of a lot of the past presidents that in the early years the presidents changed. They were the president and the chairman of the board. They changed almost every year. Well, one large section, it was very easy to do the research because it was Mr. W.O. Bittner for years and years. Can you tell me how long when he went on as chairman of the board and when he came
A little over
off?
40 years. Now, you're talking about the cooperation of the banking industry here. When my dad was president of Cullman Building, Cullman Saving Loan, my uncle Clarence Bruner was over at First Federal. And they were the two appraisers for the, Dad was appraiser for the Cullman Saving Loan, and my uncle Clarence Bruner was appraiser for the First Federal. Well, when they had appraisers, they went together. They helped one another appraise this house and that house, but they just helped out one another. And when Cullman Saving Loan had an application for a loan, my dad went out and would appraise that thing, and they would carry it back to the board. And the board would decide on that loan. And then they only loaned 80% of it. It's not like nowadays they loan 110%. And they made sure that feller had the income and everything could do it. And that's what built that saving loan into what it is today. They made sure that everybody could pay for the loan before they did that.
I remember those very days. My father worked on appraisal boards with Clarence Bruner at First Federal.
Didn't Mr. Bruner retire from two different banks?
Yes. He retired from First Bank also. And then when Interstate 65 came through, Mr. Bruner and my father and another man, I helped them did the appraisals for the condemning the land for the big road. Anyway, that's something.
Okay, we're gonna wind up.
Let me ask one thing before we leave.
You wanna find out about that pistol?
Do what?
You wanna find out about that pistol,
No, I'm gonna look at it. One of the older banks we hadn't said anything about was Parker Bank. Does anybody know anything about Parker Bank, just briefly? And the one thing I'm wondering about, what happened to him? You know, George Parker come in '74. He come and started loaning money out of his pocket. He was a lawyer. Then they opened up in the basement of the first courthouse. Then they built the building down on 2nd Avenue. Well, what terminated them? I don't know. Who, what now?
They sold to AmSac.
They sold out to AmSac.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I just didn't know. Yeah, I wondered about that.
George Parker Sr.'s son, George Parker Jr., was an air ace during the war, and he was testing missiles, and it blew up in air and just destroyed him. And that was George Parker Jr., the founder of the bank's son.
Well, see, I
That was supposed to be her
I
writing
heard
story
he
today.
died in the war, but that's what
It was testing a missile.
Well, that's interesting.
I'm gonna wind up with one Bertha Cooper story before we
Oh,
and Kate and I at St. John's. Bertha was a Sunday school teacher, and she always tried to keep us boys straight, and I tried to keep us straight in the bank too, because when I was 16, got my driver's license, I was out hunting and all dirty and nasty, and I had to do something at the bank. So I stopped by, went in the bank, and boy, did she straighten me out that I should dress more properly to come in that bank. That's what I remember about Bertha Cooper trying to keep us straight.
I can tell something better than that. Bertha used to go to the post office every morning for the bank, and this T.A. Smith was the postmaster, and she went in and he said, "Miss Cooper, how are you today?" And she said, "I haven't missed a damn thing."
That's like the woman who said, "Take that off of my tombstone, Miss So-and-so, because I haven't missed anything."
Okay.
Bertha always had a long line at the bank for customers, and I finally found out her secret. She asked them about their cats, their dog, their whole family, and they loved that. They'd get in her line so that they could chat about that kind of thing.
That's what we're missing today, Betty.
I agree.
That's right. People love personal attention.
I'd like to know how long each of these folks in the banking industry, Mr. Parker, Ms. Gill, how long they worked there at Millie, and what they, everybody, anybody that's worked there, what they did.
Yeah, y'all just jump in, tell us.
Yeah.
Millie, y'all start.
Well, I went in at over at the Leeth Bank because Forrest Ingram thought I wasn't doing enough work for him, and so I said, "Okay, if I'm giving you everything I got, I'll leave." So I went down to the bank, and they hired me that day. I went in, and they didn't really have a position for me, so I started doing this, that, and something else. And then the girl that was the bookkeeper, she quit, and they gave me that job. Well, I was through with that job by noon, and I said, I went to Bill Dunlap, and I said, "Bill," I said, "I don't have enough to do. What can I do all afternoon?" He said, "Millie, we're going to set you up as an auditor." So I started in auditing, and when I finished, I was CFO and Senior Vice President, and I also worked at South Trust most of my days and worked at Leeth at night. And after that, I went to Eva Bank and to South Trust in Birmingham auditing, so I retired about 3 times in audit.
Well, I'd like to say she was a very valuable employee as well as Billy.
Billy, you want to tell us your...
Not much to tell, Bill. I spent 26 years down there, worked from bookkeeper, vice president, branch manager.
I'll just refresh your memory for those of you that don't know me, because this is our first visit here. My name is Bethany. I was a Pitts before I married, Bethany Pitts Gill. And I'll just start back at the beginning. I graduated from Wallace State with an associate's degree in business admin. I graduated that spring, and then in the next January of 2002, I had applied online for a job with a bank, but I said, whatever, maybe I'll get it, maybe I won't. So at that current time, they called me, and I went for the interview, and I went to work with what was then was South Trust. Later, we became Wachovia Bank, and currently, I'm still employed with Wells Fargo Bank. I worked at the main branch just as training, excuse me, and I worked at the North Branch under Miss Sheila Davis for the remainder of the first year. And then I transferred to what they now call the Money Center, or the Central Vault, where we process commercial deposits. And I cannot tell you the location of that for reasons you can understand. And that's about it.
Well, we appreciate you being with us today.
Mine's not really interesting. However, the first part is, when I married and moved here, I got on at Parker Bank, and when I started to work there, I didn't know I was pregnant. But as soon as they found out I was pregnant, they let me go, which today, they would not be able to do that. All right, I stayed home and I raised my children, and so when elementary, I wanted to get out and work, mainly to learn about people because I was new here. And so I went to work at Leeth Bank in 1970, and I left there, and I worked with Bill at the branch, and In '73, I left there and went to Cullman Electric Cooperative, and I worked there 26 years, and I retired from there, and stayed home a few years and kept my youngest granddaughter. And when she got into primary school, I decided that retirement was not for me. So I got out and got another job. And I went to AmSouth. Well, Regions bought AmSouth out. And I just recently retired from Regions Bank on March 31st. And I've had a real good journey throughout my life with all my places of employment. I've enjoyed all of them. And it's been good getting to know people. And like you say, you don't have that personal relationship with your customers, but we try to at banks nowadays. But you know, you're so busy now. I mean, it's entirely different from the way it was when I first started working. It's not a thing like it used to be. And we do try to carry on conversations.
You can tell she's never satisfied at work.
No, I enjoyed all my places of employment.
Francis, I think we'll Okay, back in the late 1800s, most banks kept a vault gun, what it was called, for the reason of if you got robbed, you'd go to the vault to get the money and you could pull out a gun. And what I brought here today is a Leeth National Bank gun. It's a 1905 Smith & Wesson. That was at Leeth Bank here in Cullman. And I also brought the Derringer that was kept in Cullman Building and Loan's safe for years.
Okay.
Those are the guns I brought.
Thanks.